So welcome back to our second morning session on AI and the endangered freedom of democratic participation. Although our two speakers do not need any introduction here, I nevertheless would like to introduce both of them in reversed order. So first, Sylvia Kritzinger. She's a professor of methods in social sciences at the Department of Government at the Vienna University. Before joining the faculty, she held numerous positions inside and outside Austria, amongst which you find institutions like the Trinity College in Dublin, Podgorica University in Montenegro, Kiel University, and also the Institute of Advanced Studies. Her research focuses on political behavior and electoral research, democratic representation, and political participation and quantitative methods. And she's one of the principal investigators of the Austrian National Election Study and responsible for the demand side. And she's project leader of the project on representation in Europe. Please join me in welcoming Sylvia at the podium. And our second speaker today is Nikolaus Forgó. He is professor of IT and IP law and head of the Department of Innovation and Digitalization in Law at the Vienna Law Faculty of the University of Vienna. Before joining Vienna Law Faculty in 2017 and he was head of the Institute for Legal Informatics at Leibniz University Hanover for 10 years, and he also held numerous other positions in Germany. Currently, he's also a member of the Austrian Data Protection Council and the AI Advisory Board, so the Austrian AI Advisory Board. If you ever had a look at his homepage, you will see that he's head of numerous international, European, and Austrian projects on the intersection of law and technology. And of course, you know him also for his podcast, Ask Boni. Please join me in welcoming Nikolaus to the podium. So Sylvia, the floor is yours.
Yeah, as a political scientist in general and an intellectual scholar in particular, of course, when talking about AI, there is no possibility for me then not also taking into account questions of representation and also questions with regards to which implications this has on intellectual behavior. And that's exactly what I'm trying to do here with you in the next couple of minutes, actually 10 to 15 minutes or something like that. First of all, dwelling a little bit on the concept of democratic representation. I'm pretty sure that if I were to do a poll in this room asking what you think that political or democratic representation is about, I would probably get quite a lot of answers which do not always overlap and might even capture different types of representation. And that's actually not too surprising because indeed we do have different types of representation. All of these types of representation are important and some of those types of representation are important with regards to AI and the implication that AI may have. I'm not able to use those next 10 to 15 minutes to talk too much about the different types of representation. If you're interested in, you can talk to me afterwards. But I took out two types of representation that are of interest in this regard. Namely, the first one is the formalistic representation, which captures two aspects going together with authorization and accountability. And I'm talking about these two things a little bit more, especially with regards to electoral behavior. Because what we're doing when voting, we're taking into account what has happened in the past, right? So we take into account whether we are happy with what has happened. And we're also taking into account the future, namely would like to somehow design how politics is done in the next 4 to 5 years, the moment when we can vote again, and also take then into account what has happened in the last 4 or 5 years, and what the party that we have voted for has done so. And this is exactly where the two types of representation do somehow meet. The first one with authorization, which is really oriented towards the future. So what we can do with our vote on election day. So voters are incredibly powerful on election day. That's the reason why parties engage so much in electoral campaigns, try to win over voters on that particular day, because what they're doing on that day are two things. The first one is authorization. We want to empower somebody for the future. And we normally do that on the basis of positions that parties provide, but also leadership qualities, even though I always tend to say that we tend to put too much emphasis on leaders, on personalizations, and too little emphasis on positions. That's the reason why I put here more emphasis on the positions, namely that voters take into account then whom to vote for. And here is Downs, a very famous political economist, who says that when a man votes, back then in the 1950s, he was not yet talking about women, he's helping to select a government which will govern him during the coming election period, so really future-oriented. And he makes his decision by comparing future performances, so not past, future performances he expects from the competing parties. So you see positions and future-oriented. However, when it comes then to the second type of vote we can give on that day, this is really oriented towards the past. And it's normally mentioned or labeled accountability. And what we're doing there is looking back into the last 4 or 5 years on what the party that we have voted for, probably also the government that is in place, whether they performed in the way that we think they should have performed. And we can do two things with regards to accountability, namely we can sanction them or we can reward them, right? So parties try to somehow get the reward because that means that they're yet again be elected by the voters, and try to avoid the sanctioning, because this means that voters are very likely then to vote for another party. And especially in multi-party systems, it's easier to find another party to vote for which is ideologically quite close. And therefore, accountability is about the electorate's crucial role of appraiser of past events, past performance, and past actions. It just judges retrospectively. So the thing is that voters do two things at the same time. They do authorize for the future as well as holding somebody accountable for the past. And you can imagine that this is not always fitting together, so that voters are cross-pressured saying, okay, is it that I'm forward looking or is it that I'm backward looking? So what is the next type of representation, so that you actually see that representation can be very different? So we have this formalistic representation. Now we're going into something that we call substantive representation. And this is really about policy positions. On the one hand, the parties put forward, okay, I provide you with the program. That's the reasons why parties do put forward manifestos and also try to communicate those positions to the electorate. But then on the other hand, we have preferences by the voters. And what is ideal, of course, is that preferences and positions overlap, right? The smaller the distance, the better for the party, because then it's very likely that voters do vote for this party. And this is actually what we call in political science spatial voting, namely that we vote for the party that is closest to us in terms of position preference dimension. So, now, what has this all to do with voting advice application? Because do you know what voting advice applications are? If not, don't worry, I will show you a lot of examples in a couple of minutes and also what they can do for you. But the idea of voting applications is really that you're helping voters to figure out, first of all, what are the preferences of the voters themselves, and also what are the positions of the parties. And based on this information, then you can figure out, okay, there is a certain party closest to me, and therefore, rationally, it may make absolute sense to vote for a certain party and not for another one, right? Because if I want to be represented well in substantive terms, what I've mentioned before, then I should probably not vote for a party which has a completely different position with regards to health policy, social policy, defense policy, migration policy, than my preference is in those areas, right? And voting advice applications are doing exactly this. They try to tell you, okay, what are your preferences and what are the positions and how do you match and which party fits best your interest. There is also another thing why this is important, because most voters do probably have preferences on a couple of issues, but not on all issues that are to be debated, right, that are offered. And therefore, sometimes by just filling out those voting advice applications, also preferences are formed, and also therefore voters figure out, okay, what is important with regards to the preferences that I've just put forward. So now I show you a couple of voting advice applications. You probably have seen EU and I. This is probably the most important one when it comes to a comparative voting advice application in Europe. It's especially used in European Parliament elections, but always based on national parties. It's still online with all the party positions, so if you want to play around, please do so. But then we also have something like Wahlen in Österreich, Wahlswiper. You probably do know Wahlkabine was there in place a couple of years ago, and now it's probably coming back yet again. But for the moment being, and also for the European Parliament election, we had this Wahlswiper. But then we have another European voting advice application that you may are aware of, which is really focusing on national elections in all countries. This is Keys Compass in Europe. So these are just a couple of examples that we do have in Europe with regards to voting advice applications that are usable for the voters before a certain election. And actually, some of those voting advice applications take every election into account, namely that it's not only national elections or European Parliament election, but even local and regional elections. So some of those voting advice applications are used quite often also for other elections. So how does it work? It works like that. You see, I've just screenshotted a couple of positions that are forward. Here on the EU. I took EU and I, by the way, so that you know where I took this from. Should strengthen the regulation of artificial intelligence, technology, and so on. So you can say, do you agree, do you completely agree, or do you not have any opinion? Then there's something about agriculture. The European farmers is also there with regards to higher food prices. So you see already the positions are pretty special, not general as such, but pretty special with regards to what the preference that voters might have. But here is also something on renewable sources of energy that you can look into, and also immigrants from outside Europe should be required to accept our culture and values, whether you agree or do not agree. If you go through the EU and I, altogether there are 30 positions, and you can express 30 preferences. And at the end, after you have done that, they are asking you, how important is each of those preferences to you, right? Because it could be that you care very much about solar energy, but you do not care at all about farmers' interests, right? And this is also what they try to take into account. So for the sake of this presentation, I played around with it, and this is the outcome. Holy moly. I would not know what to do, right? After having received this information here, what am I going to do? Am I going to vote for the FPÖ, right? Or am I going to vote for the KPÖ, left? Of course, as you can imagine, I know how these systems work, and therefore I played around until I received this result for you to have also a little bit of fun. So, but just to show you that all these 30 preferences that I have put forward are now matched with the positions, and therefore now the system tells me, the algorithm behind tells me, well, you have two options, the most likely options, either you go for the FPÖ or the KPÖ. I mean, somebody could really get cross-pressured because it's completely going into different directions. But you can go a little bit deeper which I also then said, okay, what is it actually where parties do really stand? And then I see here all of a sudden, oh, the economy, it's me here, and then there are certain parties there, and then the parties are positions like that. And here it's on immigration, and here it's on the Ukraine positions. I have not shown you the Ukraine preference, but this is what you do then get as an additional information in the sense of saying, okay, where do these parties stand on those different preferences that I've put forward? So, how is the voting advice application together with the representation function? And for that, and sorry, of course you do see that voting advice applications are very important for voters, or could be very important for voters to make a decision in order to make sure that they are represented well. So choosing the party that represents them well on the preferences they have exposed to, they have expressed. But how do voting advice applications work? And here the thing gets tricky, because not all voting advice applications do work the same way, but in general, it's that there are questionnaires where the voting advice application makers are putting forward the positions they are interested in, so they make already a decision which preferences or which positions to take. They send it to the parties then can fill it out, do not have to fill it out. There's one party in Austria which never fills it out. You can guess which party it is. And then you take the manifesto data, you try to rate them, you ask experts also about the rating and so on. And based on all this information, then the positions by the parties are made and voters can then put their preferences in there. But you see already quite a lot of decisions are taken before, in the sense that preferences, positions are taken, and also that the parties have to play in with this game, and also experts can put something forward, and so on. And you see a little bit the problem with the voting advice application. And the problem is probably getting even bigger. We can discuss about it once we're putting that together with AI. Because of course, and this is probably the future, you can use AI to derive the party positions, right? Also with regards to the importance, also with regards to the sentiment that parties put into certain policy positions. And it's probably much easier to do it than instead of looking for preferences, sending it to parties. They have to provide you with information, you have to code the manifestos, then you have to ask experts whether they can rate it, and so on and so forth. It's a lot of work, and AI can probably take all the texts that parties produce and do the coding very easily in a couple of hours. And what is more, AI can update the positions, right? So they don't have to rely on an information given on day X, but if parties do change their positions in the campaign, during the campaign, then AI can immediately react to that and say, listen, whatever they have told us in May is not true in June any longer, so therefore, careful, your preference for a certain party may have changed. So there is a lot of potential with AI in the sense that everything is faster, you can take much more information into account, you can update the information based on the statements that parties make during the election campaign, and therefore increase the representation function if we consider representation from a substantive perspective. However, as there is always a however, there are of course also challenges and dangers, namely that data is not checked. It doesn't need to be correct, right? We know that parties have a huge interest on certain topics to blur their position. So not to be very outspoken of it, especially if there are intra-party conflicts. So therefore, why should they be too open about a certain statement? And the AI might not take that into account, and also the importance and the blurring that parties give to that. So therefore, we might end up with somehow positions that are, let's say, distorted, right? And certain issues made bigger than they actually are. So therefore, AI is a challenge, is a potential, provides a lot of potential, but also a lot of challenges. And this is already the case now with voting advice application, and this is what I took out of EU and I. I mean, I leave it to you to say whether you agree already what I've shown you before, whether you agree with the party placement of the parties themselves and the experts on those different dimensions. Here, more national autonomy, more European integration, or left progressive versus right conservative. Whether you really think that the SPÖ and the Greens are up there, whether the KPÖ is there, I leave it to you, also with regards, for example, to some of the things before. But you see already here, there could be a lot of bias in the information provided by experts and so on, and AI may multiply that quite substantially. Thank you very much, and I hand over to Nikolaus.
Thank you. Okay, so my role is now to put this a little bit into some legal context. I have, I don't know, about 35 slides. I will rush through them in the next 10 to 15 minutes. Sorry for that. So first, it's an important day today because today on the 2nd of August, the AI Act is to be applied. Today is the very first day. That's the simple news. You see it here somewhere in the bottom. This shall apply it's over here, it shall apply from 2nd of August 2026, and it is to be in force 20 days after its publications on the 13th of June. The problem with this is not true, right? It's not that simple. It is to be applied on the 2nd of August. However, and then there is plenty of exceptions when this is going to be applied in how far. So when it goes to what is really happening in the next weeks or month, this is the landscape as it looks in reality. It has entered into force. Now it is to be in principle to be applied in 2026. And then there are all kinds of exceptions, and the very last one is that only 3 years after the 1st of August 2024, the last of those rules have to be applied. So the question then is this a high-risk system that Silvia was just showing us? And if it is a high-risk system, then most likely most of the rules are going to be applied either in 2026 or in 2027. So any election until then is most likely not to be affected by those rules. What we saw, I think this is a slide that I showed already last year here, what we saw recently in Europe in the last years or so was that Europe had several issues. The first one is everything on the internet when it comes to voter influence or voting influence is mostly on platforms not European. Second problem, all of you, the youngers, are constantly using more and more of those platforms as your primary source of information when it comes to political decisions. Third, everything which is happening here was already created via AI. Obviously, everything that you see on your device at the moment is already created by AI, but it was not really that important because it was still a human producing the original content. It was humans creating those overviews, humans deciding on whether this or that was important. That was the situation in 2020 or so. In 2023, we saw that yesterday in the presentation on AI. It became rather apparent that now the change is that it's no longer the human creating, it's more and more the machine also creating the content. We are very influenced in our legal and political debate by this change. And now in this environment, I would like to share with you two assessments of where we stand at the moment. The first one is coming from Florian Turski. Turski is the former Secretary of State of this country for digitalization. Florian Turski published a post on LinkedIn yesterday because of the coming into force of the AI Act. So you can read it on Turski's profile on LinkedIn. What he said there, this is a DeepL translation, by the way. I hope it's accurate. Europe is setting a global standard with the AI Act, and other parts of the world will follow suit. I am convinced that this will give us a competitive advantage in the medium and long term. Okay, so this is the typical mainstream European story. I'm old enough to remember this. It's, I think, a 25 years old story, at least at the moment. Europe is in a way competitive, or becoming more competitive, because we are the avant-garde, the trendsetter, the gold standard when it comes to regulating digitalization. So question to you, who believes this statement? Yes, please raise your hand. Wow, that is impressive. Okay. 0, yeah? Nobody. And it's the State Secretary of Digitalization speaking here, right? Okay, second statement, Jörg Heidrich. This is a German lawyer, a very well-known German lawyer. He has been in the field for more than 30 years. He's the lawyer of the German publication Heise, which is one of the main publishing houses. He was here, by the way, some years ago. So Heidrich also made a statement about the AI Act last week, and this is Heidrich's statement. And I stand that the AI Act is the worst law I have had to deal with in more than 20 years of professional experience. Okay? So we have quite some gap here between the political statement, right, and the expert statement on the matter. And the question now is, why is this, or in how far can that be? And I want to share just 2 or 3 problems with you. I can't go into any more details here. The first problem looks like this. This gentleman here, Elon Musk, whom you certainly know, who has about 190 million followers on X, formerly Twitter, and who owns this company, has done several rather interesting things in the last weeks or month. One of the interesting things that he's doing is this one here. This is a tweet from Musk. I think it's also from last week. And what he's claiming here in this tweet is that when Musk, does a Google search on Trump rally, what he's seeing, at least this is what he claims, is the top stories he sees are about the opponent, about Kamala Harris. So the statement Musk is doing here, or making here, is Google is manipulating voters, including him, because of some kind of AI algorithm in the back, right? Presenting them information they are not really interested in, because they are interested in Trump and they receive something about their opponent. This is the claim. Musk is also interesting at the moment because he also publicly states that the European Commission is misbehaving in the implementation of the Digital Services Act. So one of the things he's saying here is literally, again, and this is somebody having 190 million people behind him, owning one of the most important social media networks that we have at the moment, possibly the most important in some ways. So he's publicly claiming that the European Commission offered X an illegal secret deal if we quietly censored speech without telling anyone they would not fine us. This is about the implementation of the Digital Services Act, right? And this is the attempt, excuse my French, rather ridiculous attempt of the commission, one of the commissioners being in charge to deal with this by using the very same platform, right? So Breton goes on Musk's platform, right, and states there, of course we didn't do anything wrong, right? We just did what we are supposed to do according to the Digital Services Act. So I find this interesting. I find this interesting in an environment where the European Network Information Security Agency, this is one of the agencies in charge of European matters, publicly announced last year that the most important threat, security threat when it comes on the internet, are manipulations, changes, attacks on our voting system and on our votes. Those are just 2 of the literal quotations from there. We need to be alerted to the potential misuse of AI, chatbots, and phishing attempts, blah, 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 blah. Musk also openly supports Trump at the moment. So this is also a rather interesting and important factor. These are just 2 of the more recent tweets of Musk. This is him in person, right, stating or quoting, this is from yesterday, I think, quoting that positively that Trump would do something against this issue that is discussed at the moment at the Olympics, that biological males are participating in female competitions, and also something about immigration and impact of illegal immigration on the voting system. So this is the situation we are in, right? So far this was just a description where we are, okay? And now just a few minutes on what we do. So this is the European answer. This is the act I've been talking about. First interesting part of this is it's 144 pages. 144 pages on AI. And this is what those 144 pages are mainly about, at least this is what you officially hear. It's about a categorization of risks of AI, and then an intensity of regulation fitting to this categorization. So this act is obsessed by risk. You have 776 hits of risk as a term in those 44 pages, which makes 5.4 times on every page the term risk is used. It's a risk-obsessed legislation. And the question now is, what is the risk, right? And what would this act then tell about those risks? First thing to say here is, I don't know, because already the very first question, under which circumstances and under which conditions are we talking about AI here, is already unclear. Because this is the definition of AI. And everything which is in the AI Act, and everything which is in red, is a PhD thesis. Okay? Read it, and then try to understand whether, or think whether you understand what this is, right? I think I have a better definition of AI than any of those. My definition of this is difference between machine learning and AI. If it's written in Python, it's probably machine learning. If it's written in PowerPoint, it's probably AI, right? This is the problem. It's lawyers, it's people like us making definitions looking like this. No computer scientist would ever sign. This is not a computer scientist's definition of AI. And this is one of the reasons why I do not really know whether the system that Silvia is talking about or Musk's X is something which would fit into this. Second problem, if it were AI, the next question then would be, is it an AI system or is it a general purpose AI model, which is another term introduced by the AI Act. And again, everything which is in red is a PhD thesis, right? It's very difficult to tell whether and under which conditions something is a general purpose AI model. Okay, so this question, whether anything on the internet, just a simple Google search or one of those voting systems here would be a system, a model, or both, or none of them, is something I can't really give you an answer to. Let's presume that it's a system. And let's presume then that in principle, it could be a high-risk system. The question then is, how would we assess the level of risk? So how riskful is it in reality? This is one of the thoughts of the AI Act on high risk. And I really want you to read this in detail, because when you read it, I think it's so stunning what is included here, right? So blah, 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 something can be high risk. Those rights that might be affected by high risk systems include the right to human dignity, respect for private and family life, protection of personal data, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, right to non-discrimination, education, consumer protection, workers' rights, disabilities, gender equality, intellectual property, effective remedy, fair trial, right to defense, presumption of innocence, right to good administration. All this could be affected by a high-risk system. Everything can be affected by a high-risk system. And in addition, children are different, right? Children are even on top of all of this. So is this something, this Silvia's phenomenon, something which falls into this? Is it something which might negatively affect any of those systems. Well, the first question then is, what is a risk, right? Is this what Silvia is describing, a risk? Good news here is we have a definition of risk now in the AI Act, and this is the funny definition of risk. Risk means the combination of the probability of an occurrence of harm and the severity of harm. First statement for the afternoon, I find this, in essence, fundamentally unethical definition of risk, because it draws or it produces an equation between a quantitative number, how many people or how many things, how many objects might be affected, and a qualitative number, which is how severely, how deeply are you affected. It's not really nice to hear that the risk is negligible because you are the only one where this risk might realize, right? But this is not my topic today. My topic is, it's actually rather difficult to tell what exactly would be the harm that Silvia is talking about. Is the harm that people are misguided in their political decision making? Or is the harm that they don't know that they are misguided? Or is the harm that suddenly people who would not have voted now go there and start and take the wrong decision? Or what, right? So as long as we don't know what exactly the harm is, it will be completely impossible to assess the risk. And then last, before I hand over to Silvia again, when you have a list of high-risk systems in the annex of the AI Act. And the important message for those of you who are not that experienced in EU law, in regulations, in particular in this domain I'm working for, the most important information is often in the annexes, because this is where things become rather precise. So this is now the answer, the simple answer to Silvia's question, which is a high-risk system according to Annex 3, Section 8b would be something which is intended to influence the outcome of an election or a referendum. Something which is intended to influence. And then there is something else, which is another PhD thesis. Again, I would like you to do a poll together with me. Who of you believes that what Silvia was showing is intended to influence the outcome of an election or referendum? Okay, so this is about 10 out of 100 in the room, so 10%. I don't know the answer. The only thing that I know, if it is to be qualified as a system to be intended to, blah, 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 the outcome of this is a lot of very heavy regulatory burden coming with this. These are just some of the articles. And again, in all of this, again, plenty of PhD topics. You need to run, for example, a risk management system, and this risk management system needs to be all this here, which is good news for lawyers because you can write PhD theses, but very bad news for people who try to develop such things. So if this is high risk, the outcome of this is it will be very difficult for Europeans to further run such a system on the internet. It will kill such a system. And whether or not it's high risk, as I said, 10% of the opinion that it is, 90% probably don't know. I don't know either, and I hand over back to Silvia. Thank you.
Yeah, we have prepared, or I have prepared a couple of questions based on the presentation we had, probably combining them. And one of the main questions that I really would like to hear more about it, I mean, we have heard already a little bit about the risk that such a voting advice application is having for vote choices, but we can go one step further and saying, okay, what is the risk then for the representation function, not only of the voting advice applications, but also of then AI to be used in order to improve those voting advice applications. Because as I mentioned before, you have also lots of potentials with AI with regards to somehow providing more information with voting advice application, but also, as we have heard, there are of course also risks connected to it. And therefore, a couple of additional questions are raised in this regard, namely regulation, is it needed or not? What are new forms of representation that we might be able to put forward in the AI era, as well as new tools of finding party representativeness. It might be that we are simply not using voting advice applications due to the risks that may take overhand instead of the potentials that are also there, as I would like to outline at this stage. Thank you.
So do you have any answers to Silvia's questions, or any questions relating to the two talks?